It's interesting for me because I think I mentioned in my LinkedIn post, I wouldn't say that I'm like a naturally empathetic person. And I wouldn't necessarily say most salespeople are.
Yeah,
Um, However, it is a skill that you can work on, and I'm never going to be the most empathetic person. In fact, I'm probably more of like a fix it type of person.
sure.
Like, hey, you got a problem. I see that you have a problem. Here's the solution to your problem. Now let's move forward. Right.
Hmm.
And that is kind of the opposite of empathy. And for me, it's really interesting because I actually have one of my kids who is an incredibly empathic kid. He is the kid that he recognizes when people are down. He goes and picks them up. He gives them a hug. And it's something that I really have to work on. But I think as salespeople, we're dealing with this process of somebody having to make an enormous life change, that nobody wants to. Rarely do you ever have anybody that reaches out and says, hey, I'm kind of bored. I'm going to come in, I'm going to tour
Yeah,
the senior living community. By the way, let me give you like 8 grand a month so I can live here with a bunch of other people.
sure.
And so, to be able to really kind of channel that inner empathy, I think says something um, about you as an individual, and it makes you, you have to be vulnerable. I think
100%.
ultimately we're expecting them to be vulnerable with us and share their emotions and really trying to figure out, why they're not making this change. And as salespeople, we also have to be able to open ourselves up to that as well. And sometimes it's really uncomfortable.
Welcome to The Move In, a senior living marketing podcast from Unlock Health, a full service marketing partner for the aging services industry. Join us for candid conversations exploring the latest marketing strategies with the senior living community leaders and innovative solution partners who are moving our industry forward. Together, we'll build a community to build better communities. Are we overtraining for tech and undertraining for empathy in senior living sales? Hello, I'm Larry Williams, and welcome to the Move in Senior Living Marketing powered by Unlock Health. The truth is, we've built an industry hyper-focused on generating demand, but we may have overlooked the skills needed to actually convert it. In senior living, empathy, curiosity, and emotional resilience are just as important, if not more, than follow-up cadences and marketing automation. In today's episode, I'm joined by Reed Davis, the Chief Learning Officer at the One-on-One Sales Academy. We dive into what it really takes to drive occupancy, and here are a few things we discussed. Sales teams need more support. Most communities still lack consistent skill-based training beyond lead generation. Also, soft skills drive results. Empathy, curiosity, and detachment often outperform high-pressure closing, and yes, these can be taught. And culture impacts conversion. Pressure doesn't close deals. Supportive leadership and positive sales culture do. All right, let's jump into it. We are back on the move in senior living marketing. I have my friend Reed Davis with us. Reed, you look a lot different than the last time I saw you at Argentum, which you had a great mustache. I was really jealous. My wife won't let me have a mustache, so I'm living through you these days.
Hey, my wife only lets me have a mustache 30 days a year. And
Just when you're
so
raising money, right?
it's just when I'm raising money. Yeah, I'm part of a group called Mustaches for Kids. We have a local chapter here in Omaha, and every year there's about 250 or 300 guys that get together. We select a charity that all the money goes to something to do with kids. This year in particular, it was Angels Among Us, which is an organization that helps support families dealing with pediatric cancer.
Mm.
But we've done Ronald McDonald House in the past. We've done community outreach centers. We've done a number of different things, but it's pretty cool because there's 300 guys that grow a mustache for 30 days. And this year we raised over $1.1 million.
That's incredible. Congratulations.
I mean,
Great work.
unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah. It really helps to affect a lot of families. So
Yeah, man. Well, and if you have any information, I'd like to post that in the show notes so people can learn more. Because if I remember right, you do this, was it once or twice a year?
once a year, every
Once a
May.
year.
Yeah.
Okay, every May. That's incredible. You had a Ted Lasso look going at
Yeah.
Argentum, and so people could take a picture with you and donate to the cause. And again, thank you for the work you've done and continue to do. And hopefully we can jump in and help raise more money next year.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, every year my mustaches, you have to have a theme. It has to have a name. My mustache's name is Ted Lasso's lip lettuce. So every year, I dress up as Ted Lasso. I download Facebook on my phone for 1 month out of the year. It's the only time I ever
Yeah.
post anything on there to bug all my friends and family about donations. And I hang up the hair, I hang up the mustache and the whole get up here in my office. It sits on top of my bookshelf so I can sit and look at it. Because to me, I think Ted Lasso is, one, he's just one of the top 10 characters I think of all time.
100%.
And there's just so many great things that we can take away from him and just his approach to life.
For
So,
sure. Yeah, and you pulled off the look. I'd like to see you as you roll back around to that one time, when you're putting on the Ted Lasso look. I just picture it being like Batman putting on the cape and the cowl. You're ready to serve, and I bet that's a momentous occasion for you.
well, one of the funniest things was, after I was done at our Argenum and I'd been standing there and working for a little bit, I realized I still had the wig on and it started to itch. And I took it off right as a lady walked by, and the look on her face, because she was like, I thought that was your real hair.
Man.
And so I'm not as blessed as you are, Larry, to still have this incredible head of hair. But for 30 days out of the year, I get to put on the wig and pretend like it was back in the day, and I still have a great head of hair.
I
So
think I would have been a little bit like just heartbroken if I saw you tear off the mustache also. Like that would have broken my heart.
hey, the mustache was real. So
The mustache is real. So,
yeah.
well, let's get into what you're doing these days, Reed. So, you are the Chief Learning Officer, which is a title I love.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the One on One Sales Academy. Tell us about the One on One Sales Academy.
Yeah, so the One-on-One Sales Academy is an idea that David Smith, who is the founder of Sherpa, had. And one of the things that we were looking at is what's an opportunity in the marketplace to be able to help salespeople hone their skills. When we look at kind of the landscape of senior living, we look at the landscape of what's available at conferences. As we look around, there's just fewer and fewer sales tracks available.
Yeah.
The focus, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't be, but there's such a tremendous focus on marketing and driving leads. And then to me, I feel like there's a tremendous focus on how can we follow up with leads in any possible way other than having our sales directors do them.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
we're focused on call centers have their place. Don't get me wrong. I think they can be a tremendous resource. But we're focused on call centers. We're focused on AI. We're focused on chat GPT. How can we make the sales process easier? And in this industry, the truth is it's not. It's just not an easy process. It's the reason why there's only about an 8% penetration rate from the number of people that reach out about senior living in any given year. There's a reason why only 8% of them move in.
Hmm.
It's an emotional process, and I think it's a process that we don't equip our sales people in our communities to deal with nearly as well. And so that's why, as we kind of looked around and figured out what can we do, because if you're an executive director, there's ongoing CEUs, there's ongoing education that you have access to. You have to do it. Same thing with nursing, same thing in the dietary department. In the sales department, there's not really access for any of the sales professionals to be able to learn and grow on their own. And so what we decided to do was create a sales academy where we don't focus on AI. We don't focus on marketing. We don't focus on lead generation. What we focus on is providing a resource for these wonderful salespeople that we have in this industry to be able to go out and on a daily basis learn a little something new to be able to help more and more prospects and be able to convert at a higher rate.
I love that. And I feel like it's the soft skills that we're losing. And like you said, going to a lot of conferences, a lot of tracks about marketing, driving leads, you get AI and really leveraging data. But at times, like I think we need to really focus on again, those soft skills of selling and making those connections and really being there as a human. You had a post, I think it was last week, that I took a screenshot of because I love it. I'm not going to do it justice, but you mentioned something about the importance of empathy in the sales process. And it's something that I say all the time. It is the most important it's the most important skill to have when it comes to sales. You need to have empathy, especially going through this process when you're looking for that next step in life. Which in this conversation is senior living. We need to have an empathetic outlook for what that person's going through. But I think it's good to have that same mindset, regardless of what industry you're in and what you're selling. You need to be empathetic to what the other person, what that potential client, what their needs are.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I think that to me, it's interesting for me because I think I mentioned in my LinkedIn post, I wouldn't say that I'm like a naturally empathetic person. And I wouldn't necessarily say most salespeople are.
Yeah,
Um, However, it is a skill that you can work on, and I'm never going to be the most empathetic person. In fact, I'm probably more of like a fix it type of person.
sure.
Like, hey, you got a problem. I see that you have a problem. Here's the solution to your problem. Now let's move forward. Right.
Hmm.
And that is kind of the opposite of empathy. And for me, it's really interesting because I actually have one of my kids who is an incredibly empathic kid. He is the kid that he recognizes when people are down. He goes and picks them up. He gives them a hug. And it's something that I really have to work on. But I think as salespeople, we're dealing with this process of somebody having to make an enormous life change, that nobody wants to. Rarely do you ever have anybody that reaches out and says, hey, I'm kind of bored. I'm going to come in. I'm going to tour
Yeah,
the senior living community. By the way, let me give you like 8 grand a month so I can live here with a bunch of other people.
sure.
And so, to be able to really kind of channel that inner empathy, I think says something about you as an individual, and it makes you, you have to be vulnerable. I think
100%.
ultimately we're expecting them to be vulnerable with us and share their emotions and really trying to figure out, why they're not making this change. And as salespeople, we also have to be able to open ourselves up to that as well. And sometimes it's really uncomfortable. I think the thing that really holds us back as salespeople from doing that is that, there's this ego attached with sales. And hey, listen, I will tell you, I'll be the first one to tell you, I am one of the most competitive people you'll ever meet. I hate to lose more than I like to win, like a lot more than I like to
Yeah,
win. And that's what really drives me. And I think that, in sales, you have to have that competitive nature, right? You have to
sure.
be able to want to win, and to not let things get down. Because if we look at like the national conversion average in senior living across the country, it's like 23% is average. So you're getting told no, what, 77% of the time? And as
Hmm.
somebody that doesn't like to lose, which is most salespeople, that can be really disheartening. And if you're crushing it, you're still getting told no 60% of the time, right?
Yeah.
Like, because if you're closing at a 40% clip, that's pretty dang good.
Yeah, and still a lot of no's, but
Yeah.
you have to and I think that's where a lot of salespeople struggle, is we're so process driven, and we look at salespeople almost like data, which is, you know, you gotta push a prospect or a potential move in through this pipeline. It's, "Okay, what's the next step? What's the next step?" When in reality, it's good to put yourself in their shoes, which is what empathy is, "Hey, what's going on? Well, how are you feeling?" And a bit like you said, like, the emotional decisions, that this group's going through, it's not just about moving into a new place. It's about leaving their home that they've had. It's about the financial burdens. When you get into memory care, you also have the family who's probably making these decisions. It's a very emotional process. And I think that's something else, another soft skill that I've come to rely on in my growth career, my sales career, is detachment. Is that something just trying to detach from the outcomes, which is hard to do when it comes to sales because we are held accountable for those outcomes. But got any thoughts on that front? I mean, I know I'm kind of switching from empathy to detachment, but do you see any correlation, to what I'm speaking about?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I see is it's interesting when you kind of talk about that detachment, because one of the things that I always say is that, you have to let go of the outcome.
Hmm.
If you truly are, going to demonstrate your commitment to your prospect, and if you tell your prospect, hey, listen, I'm not really here to sell you. I'm
Yeah.
here to be a guide. I'm here to be a resource. I'm going to walk you through this journey. And then you turn around and just try to get a check. You haven't demonstrated your commitment to what you initially told them.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, nobody that's selling senior living, or at least I haven't met anybody yet, and I've been around a while, nobody that's selling senior living is 85 years old. So we don't actually know what it's like to step into their shoes. Now we've helped a lot of people that have been in a similar situation. And so while we don't necessarily know what it's like to be in their shoes, we can connect within something within ourselves and some difficult situations that we've been in. So
Yeah.
I can't tell somebody, hey, I know how this goes because I helped Ethel last week and she was in the exact same situation. I think empathy in senior living and kind of removing yourself from that outcome goes, hey, listen, I'm really sorry that you're having to go through this. This must be really tough. And
Yeah.
just recognizing and acknowledging that, I think is really powerful. And that removes you, right? Because when you talk about kind of detaching yourself from the outcome, one of the things that I've learned over not only studying like prospect centered selling, but then really kind of diving into just the psychology of change is that your intention drives your behavior.
Mm.
So, as kind of a change practitioner and somebody that's helping somebody change or make a major life change, if my goal is simply just to move them in, every single thing I do is going to be geared towards that. Everything I do is going to drive that behavior of trying to just get a check. Now, if I approach it, and this is, I think, how I've always approached sales and senior living is I want to be able to help this person, right?
Hmm.
Because that's why I enjoy being in this industry. I didn't get into this industry to make money. I didn't get into this industry to be rich. I got into this industry because I grew up around the corner from my grandparents. And I absolutely love spending all the time that I did with them because I could just hop on my bike and ride over to their house. And if
Yeah.
I was sick from school, I was there. During the summers, I was there. We were always we went on vacation with my grandparents. We did all of that. And I get to be able to help hundreds and hundreds of people just like my grandparents every single day. And even now that I'm maybe not necessarily working in a community, it allows me to still be able to help sales directors, which helps older people. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do, right? But if
Yeah.
if my whole goal is just to move somebody in and get a check and get a commission, then they're going to see through that. And let's be honest, we're talking about people that are 80, 85 years old. They can afford to live in a senior living community, which means they have been pretty successful in life,
Sure.
right? They can see through the BS. They can see through all of that. A lot of them have been in sales or at least led companies that had sales teams. They can sniff that stuff out. So if you're not being genuine and honest, with your intention, they'll see right through it and they'll just go to the next place.
Yeah, for sure. And I love what you said about checking that intention. And that's something that I think we need to do more in sales, which is really checking that intention at the door. If it, like you said, if it's to sell, that's going to come across. If your intention to is to help and to guide and be a support system, that's going to come across as well. And then it kind of goes into a loop of the other factors, which is what we spoke about, empathy and detachment. So we're covering a lot of those skills and really I'd say not skill, more of a mindset when it comes to sales. So that being said, what is your advice? Like we've spoken about these mindsets. Where do you typically start with like salespeople in terms of getting them onto the right path? Is it really a mindset or is it a skill? What's your thoughts on that front?
I think it's a little bit of twofold.
Hmm.
One, as a sales director, you have to be open to change. And you have to be open to doing things a little bit differently. Where I like to start is, to me, I think the most important place to start is at the top of the company.
Okay.
Because what I find is that, just like with any company, everything rolls downhill.
Yeah.
right? And so what happens is I think that the pressure to perform gets put on by, the CEO, and rightfully so, right? If you're a for-profit company, the idea is to make money. And in senior living, the way to make money is to be able to get occupancy, right? And for sales, oftentimes I think people forget that the sales teams are the only revenue driver at a community. Everybody else is is a manager, is a budget manager. They manage the money that they're spending. The sales team is the only significant source of revenue for any community. And so
Yeah.
naturally, they're the ones that get the most pressure to be able to perform. But in not just my opinion, what I've seen over the last 22 or 23 years now is that the greater the pressure from the top and the less it gets filtered as you kind of go down through the levels, the more pressure that's put on the salesperson, they just turn around and put that pressure back on the prospect.
For sure. Yeah.
And the natural human reaction to stress and pressure is either fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
And so you're
It
actually pushing prospects further away by not just softening that a little bit. And to me, right, the CEO, COO, that's their job. We got to do that. But as it kind of comes down, we've got to do a better job as an industry of figuring out, instead of how to pressure people to perform, we need to figure out how to motivate them to perform.
Yeah, it's funny you say all that because before I hit, record, you and I were speaking about our kids, their sports activities and everything. And a common theme that we both shared was, putting pressure on kids for, in athletic events, and how that pressure doesn't make them perform better. Typically, it makes them perform worse. And I feel like it's the same with sales. When things are going well and they feel relaxed, they can be themselves. They can be more of that guide. Where when that pressure is placed on them, they start overthinking, they start putting pressure, and it goes in a different direction. So that you mentioned you like to start at the top. How do you help guide that top to keep, people from having that pressure? And I know we got to talk about pipeline and everything else, but what's some advice that you can share with others of how to keep that positive mindset, and how to keep there from being like that type of pressure on salespeople, through this journey?
Yeah, here's the thing: salespeople know when they're not performing. If you have a salesperson that's worth anything, and most salespeople are, I think that sometimes salespeople get a really bad rap when they're not performing because we don't look at any kind of external factors that might be pushing that. Every salesperson wants to perform. I've never met a salesperson that went, you know what, I don't want to make sales.
Yeah.
It's not really what I'm into. And so, I think that the companies that I've seen is that the leadership in the company um, eats, breathes, and sleeps company culture. Somebody a couple of months ago told me that company culture is measured by how well your employees sleep on Sunday night.
I love that.
I was like, that's
That's great. Yeah, for sure.
incredible. Because I've been that person on Sunday night who's not sleeping because I am, I don't want to go to work the next morning
Yeah.
because I'm afraid of what my boss is going to say. I'm afraid of the pressure. And I've been in sales my entire career. I was a college athlete. I performed at a high level. I kind of like the pressure. Like, I want the ball in my hands when the
Mhm.
game's on the line. But I also need to feel valued as a person too. And I think that the thing we don't do enough as an industry is we don't celebrate the really great times.
For sure.
Instead, we only focus on the bad times and putting more pressure on. And I don't think it's necessarily fair from a sales standpoint, is that when you have a sales team that constantly performs and there's an operational issue or there's a move out a month where we have a bunch of move outs, that we just heap more pressure on the
Mhm.
sales team. We don't ever sit back. I'm not saying we don't ever. There's plenty of companies that do, but the companies that I see that constantly struggle are ones that always put that pressure on their salespeople to perform, even when they're performing.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
that's gonna break them at some point.
yeah, yeah. You can't. I get occupancy is the number one thing, right? We have to have a highly occupied building, but I can tell you the organizations that culture starts at the top and we have that supportive, motivational, approach in the way that we lead a company are the companies that are sitting on 93, 95% occupancy as a company. And the ones that are constantly successful is because they're motivating, they're investing in their people,
Yeah.
which is the thing that is wild to me, that in this industry that we don't invest in the only people that drive revenue oftentimes. Training and coaching is either not budgeted for, or it's oftentimes the first thing that gets cut. And so, reinvesting in your people to be able to do that through, right? I mean, I'd love it if it was through one-on-one sales academy, but whether it's through anybody, there's a number of really talented people in this industry that can really help, your sales teams hone some of those soft skills. And I think also work with leadership to be able to help you better motivate and move occupancy forward.
Yeah.
Because I know what doesn't, and what doesn't is, you perform really well in January, and then February you have a slow month, and somebody in leadership goes, well, why didn't they perform like they did in January? Well, do you
Yeah.
not think they don't want to?
Yeah.
Right? They had a great November. They had a great December. They had an unbelievable January. Do you think that they all of a sudden forgot how to sell in February? No. Like, I like to kind of look at it backwards and go, all right, well, what are some of the factors that may have, what happened in February
Sure.
that didn't maybe happen in those other months, or maybe what happened in January that led to a slow February?
Yeah. I For sure. That's something I've heard before is it takes 12 months to make a year. And don't get too high and don't get too low. Just focus on those those activity-based goals, and just to kind of keep you on track through that entire phase. Think about, like, we start at the top, in terms of the culture. Now we'll kind of take a step back and go back to what you said about the training. Like, because I think that's really important. And far too often, I do feel like, regardless of the industry, we kind of rush salespeople into the spotlight really quickly. And if we're not careful, we set them up for failure. How long, like, what's your advice when it comes to training, especially new salespeople? And I'm sure it depends on what level they're at, but do you have any guidance or feedback on that front?
Yeah, I think, when you look at it, the common thing that I always hear about sales, right? And whether I've heard it from executive directors a number of times, they go, oh, hey, sales has got this, right? And I think what people think is either we come in with experience, and a lot of us do, we have experience, and maybe it's not in senior living, but maybe it's just in sales. But I think the common misperception is, hey, they're great with people. Right.
Yeah.
So let's just throw them into this community. And if they're great, they were wonderful during their interview. They actually followed up with me. They did all of these great things. And then the first time they're faced with, an awkward conversation, they don't know how to be able to handle it. I will never forget being 23 or 24 and a son sitting down and talking to me about his mom's incontinence.
Mm,
And I can't even imagine. I was not prepared for that
sure.
conversation whatsoever. I can't imagine. I hope even, 20 years later, 21 years later now, that I hope that, my face didn't look like what my brain was thinking.
Sure.
But I think that we do that with sales, and we go, oh, you know what? They got it. Let's just show them around the building. Let's just make sure they understand the pricing situation. And then again, we don't provide anywhere for them to practice.
Yeah.
And so, you come into a situation where the only people that salespeople have to practice on is the prospect sitting in front of them.
Yeah.
Because listen, like, this role play, this awkward role play between you and your regional, it's just weird and awkward. And it doesn't really, I don't think, maybe help develop some skills. But I think if you take it from the standpoint of looking at a secret shop, maybe that will do it,
Yeah,
right?
for
And
sure.
not taking the approach. I love secret shops. I think that, using secret shops as a coaching tool is a wonderful thing, and that we shouldn't get so upset when we get secret shop, because it's an opportunity. Look at it as an opportunity to practice, right? You take a major league baseball team, and I coach my son's U12 select baseball team. We do the exact same drills in our practices that major leaguers do.
Yeah.
And it's because you have to develop some of that muscle memory and some of those easy things to be able to do. So if you can do that with a secret shopper, that's wonderful. It's an opportunity for you to be able to learn and to grow. And that's one of the reasons why we created the sales academy,
For
was so that
sure.
you could go in and be able to practice and be able to learn some of those skills. And the next iteration is that we're building out an AI role play game where you can go in and actually literally have a place to practice.
That's
With
love
no
that.
harm, no foul if you mess something up. It's an
Yeah.
opportunity to learn.
You're not losing a qualified prospect.
Right.
You're testing this, and like you said, the role playing I've always struggled with,
Oh,
like,
me
because it just
too.
seems so inauthentic, and you feel awkward and everything, and to be able to practice this, like you said, with AI, I've heard more and more of that here recently, and just, like, going back to the soft skills in terms of how to, manage that message, because you're speaking about that, putting that person who is outgoing out there thinking, "Oh, they're a great salesperson." I'll always say that I feel like it's the most overrated trait in sales is an outgoing personality, because there's sales is so much more than that. It's you have to have discipline. You have to, like, be able to manage so much more than it can't just be the flair of the personality. What other skill sets do you find valuable when it comes to specifically senior living sales? We spoke about empathy. I mentioned a detached mindset, just covered also a outgoing personality, how it's touch or go. But what are some other skills that you recommend or that you see valuable specifically in senior living sales?
I think there's two major ones that I don't think get talked about enough, and they kind of go hand in hand. I Kelly Singleton Meyer just wrote a book called "The More You Know, the More You Close,"
Yeah,
and so to me, one of the biggest things I think is curiosity. I think when
that's
I
a big
look
one.
back on the success that I've had in senior living, and the success that I've had from a sales standpoint, being a salesperson, it's not because I was the best closer. And I'll tell trainings this at the beginning. I go, hey, listen, like this is going to sound weird coming from the guy who's sitting here doing sales training for you, but I wasn't the greatest closer. And I'm dead serious. Like I don't think I ever remember asking for a check. I rarely ever had to use like a hard close to get somebody to do it. I don't know if I ever did. I don't really like I don't really like confrontation.
Sure.
I don't really like talking about money. It makes me really uncomfortable. In fact, I'll let you in a little secret. Haven't logged in my bank account in like 12 years. Don't even, I know what bank I bank at.
That's good. That's a good
No
start.
idea what sign it is, right? My wife does all of that stuff.
Yeah.
However, I was really, really good at making connections, and
Mhm.
I was genuinely curious about the person sitting on the other side of the table, and it didn't matter if it was the prospect, if it was the kid, I always wanna know the story, and it probably comes from my dad is a fantastic storyteller. He's been kind of the orator of our family and passed down all these amazing family stories throughout the generations that my kids are now starting to get into. So I'm sure that was probably part of it. But again, and according to Kelly too in her book, like you can learn curiosity. If you're not a
Yeah.
naturally curious person, you can learn to be more curious. And I think the other side of that is getting out of your comfort zone,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
One of my favorite quotes, and I'm not going to be able to tell you who said it, is your comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there.
I like that a lot.
And as a salesperson, I think sometimes we're afraid to ask the question because we're
Mhm.
afraid that we're either going to offend them, we're afraid that we're going to put them off, and or we're afraid that we're going to convince them to stay home.
Yeah.
But I got news for you. They've already tried to explore every single reason to stay home. That's why they reached out, is because it's not working.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a safe place to have these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, when we think about like what soft skills can we develop, you can work on empathy for sure, right? And it
Mhm.
is an incredibly important part of the conversation and the process. But to me, it's about curiosity and then having the courage to ask some of those tougher questions,
Mhm.
because that's when you really start to kind of dig in. And when you look at, what does a prospect say? A prospect is going to tell you why they're not moving in, right? That's why we hear I'm not ready, or it's too expensive. And there's some really interesting data from Primo Solutions from Mike Miller about like what's the validity of the it's too expensive. And it's only really true about 5% of the time is what they
Hmm.
found. Most of the
That,
time, it's just a smoke screen trying to kind of throw you off the scent so
sure.
that you'll stop following up with them, even though they're the ones that reach out to you.
Yeah.
And so really being able to do that. And what I find is that, I used this example earlier today in a training, is that I had a sales director that I was coaching with, and she did a wonderful job gathering information. I mean, she knew. I would always joke, like, she knew the color of the prospect's underwear. Like, I mean, she knew if you looked at her prospect
Yeah.
profile. I mean, they were, Sherpa, what's now a line, tracks how much information you fill out. I mean, and her stuff was like off the charts. It was more
Yeah.
than I'd ever seen. Couldn't close, couldn't close, couldn't close, couldn't close. And we went in and we kind of looked, and we were trying to figure out, like, why is it that she couldn't close? You have a great community with a great reputation. She seemingly on paper and on secret shops and stuff does a really good job. But what it came down to, and we ended up kind of figuring out through working with her for a long time and kind of really diving in and looking at the analytics, was that she was afraid to ask the tough questions.
Mm.
So she knew all the surface information, and she knew about jobs and marriages and kids and relationships, but she was scared to ask the tough question that would really be able to help kind of propel them forward, because she was afraid that she either might offend them or that she might turn them off, and they wouldn't move to her community.
Sure. So
And
here,
so,
so here's the question: can you teach that?
yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what, like, because we're in sales, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And one thing about salespeople is we all know our own strengths and weaknesses. And we're we kind of be honest with each other about that. But I'm curious about the teaching that I say that soft skill of asking the hard questions. Is it about just getting someone comfortable? Like, what's your feedback there? Because I've heard that before. It's that is a challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't think that it I don't think that it's something that comes naturally to a lot of people.
Hmm.
It was funny. I was doing a podcast with Sylvia Krinsky, who's the sales coach for Charter. Sylvia's from New York City. She's a little bit more kind of like, she's not aggressive, but she'll just kind of
Direct.
say direct. Yeah, direct is a
Yeah.
great,
Yeah.
yeah, right. Like, she's a little bit more direct. And I said, hey, I asked her the question. I said, hey, Sylvia, I said, let me ask you this, because some of my favorite people to train are people in the Northeast, right? There's just this, like, directness. You
Hmm.
don't ever have to worry about what they're thinking or if they're enjoying the training or not, because not only will their face say it, but so will their mouth.
Yeah.
They will tell you, they're really kind of out in the open with their feelings and emotions. I said, do you think it's just something? Is it a cultural thing? Is it kind of a regional thing? Like, what is it about that you think people from kind of the Northeast, like, New York and Philly, don't ever have a problem asking some of those tougher questions? What is it? And she said, you know what I think it is? I think we just care. And we
That's
care
interesting.
so deep and we care so passionately that we're not worried if we're going to offend that person, but we're going to ask because we feel like that'll help them move forward.
Yeah. It's
And
just
so I
being
think
direct.
that, yeah, just
It's
being direct. And you know
yeah,
what? If you're uncomfortable, sometimes that's great, because it shows that you're being vulnerable.
for sure.
And you
Yeah.
can even preface it with and say, hey, listen, I, this question makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I want to
Hmm.
try to help you move forward. So I'm just going to ask it. And if it
Yeah.
offends you, I'm terribly sorry. That's not my intention whatsoever, right? What's your intention? Your intention drives your behavior. And by saying that, I think you have an opportunity to kind of open yourself up and ask some of those questions. And I think you'd be surprised at the outcomes.
And I think on top of that, it goes into another important skill is authenticity when it comes to sales. If you try to be like somebody else, that's not going to come across as you. You have to
Yeah.
be authentically you and have these conversations as you. And if you're uncomfortable with this, and that's one thing to learn and grow. But if that's not how you approach things, then like just go like be yourself and have human conversations. I think that's such an important part of the sales process that nobody speaks about, which is just be authentic when it's all said and done.
Yeah, here's the thing, right? Like, you look at all these studies and why people buy in senior living, and
Mhm.
the importance of building trust. And I think sometimes people get confused, or they kind of get it twisted, where they think that they have to like everybody they trust.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily the case. And there's certainly people that you like that you don't trust. One of my best friends from high school, loved the dude, wouldn't trust him with anything.
Yeah.
But there's also times where I've had professionals that I really value their knowledge. I value their opinion. I know that they're highly educated in the field that they're talking about, and they don't have a great personality at all. Or maybe it's like you two just don't clash, but at the end of the day, they have your best interest at heart. Those are the people that I think you gravitate towards in a difficult situation, because they're not going to sugarcoat it.
Yeah,
When
for
you're trying
sure.
to make a tough situation, no amount of sugarcoating is going to make it easier. Listen, no amount of sugarcoating is going to make it easy to leave your home that you've lived in for 45 years, where you've raised your kids and all of the memories are there. And you're the one that, you built the house and you did the landscaping yourself and you took pride in the way it looked for all of these years. No amount of sugarcoating is going to be able to help you get past that. Sometimes it takes a little bit of that direct question and that directness to be able to make somebody go, you know what, I didn't think about it that way.
For sure. In a unique way, since you and I started this conversation before, again, I hit the record button about being a parent. And it kind of reminds me of being a parent, which is sometimes your kids aren't going to like you much, but sometimes you just got to ask those tough questions. Because especially if in your heart, you're asking the right questions and you want what's best for them when it's all said and done. And Reed, honestly, I could speak with you for another 30 minutes. And I'd like to get you back on, because one thing I'd like to discuss more is the follow-up process and
Yeah.
the future of. So we definitely want to table this conversation and pick this back up at a later process, at a later time. My last question for you, though, is if somebody handed you a mic and said, all salespeople in senior living need to hear this one thing, what is that?
Don't be afraid to fail.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that a lot of times we don't take risks because we're afraid to fail,
Yeah.
because we're afraid that we're going to look like a failure to, maybe we're going to disappoint ourselves. Maybe we're going to disappoint our boss or disappoint the leadership in the company. But if you're not, if you're afraid to fail, you won't ever try.
For sure. And I think it also is in your pipeline. If you're afraid to take people off saying like, okay, this is not a good fit, it shows failure. And you have to be willing to be courageous and keep going forward. And so I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because we have to dream big, and we have to have big, expectations out of ourselves, and continue to be the best version of ourselves. And that's when it's all said and done. That's all we can ask of us, as humans and as professionals. So thank you for sharing that. Reed, where can people find you to learn more about what you're doing and more about your approach, and if they ever want to ask further questions?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to be able to get a hold of me. You can also visit us at oneonone.com/academy. That's the Sales Academy's website. So
Nice.
you can visit us there. But I'd say reach out direct to me on LinkedIn, or my email is just reed@oneonone.com. It might be one of the easiest.
That is the easiest.
It's the
Congratulations.
easiest. REED at oneonone.com. I mean, one of the shortest, easiest emails that you could ever have. So
I think I have an easier time remembering yours than mine now. So Reed, hey, thank you. Thank you for all that you do for this community. You've been a friend of mine for a while, and someone who always has advice. And I say this to the community, like, if you have just questions about any part of senior living, marketing, or sales, reach out to Reed. He's a great one to know, and someone to connect with. So thanks again, Reed.
Yeah, appreciate it, Larry.
A big thank you to Reed Davis for bringing the energy, insight, and honesty around what it takes to elevate sales performance in senior living. If there's one theme I hope you walk away with, it's this: selling in senior living isn't just about filling the pipeline, it's about building connection. Here are a few notes I took during this conversation. First, lead with curiosity. Ask deeper questions. Don't just pitch, connect. Also, practice before pressure. Give your sales teams room to learn before they're in the hot seat. And finally, coach, don't crush. Motivation beats micromanagement every time. Thanks again to Reed for the great conversation. And until next time, let's go create some meaningful connections.